Welcome to Backyard Cigars. Glad that you could join me once again. Today's cigar is a throwback to a different time. Now, I know we've done this before, but we'll do it again. This is the NEFTA Perfecto Havana, and it dates back to 1902. That's right, it dates back to 1902. And it was really hard to get information on this cigar. Not just because of how old it was, but also because of how, well, let's just say it wasn't the most popular cigar. Not for a while. It was from a smaller cigar maker, and eventually it became a larger brand. But even then, it was dwarfed by the larger brands within the portfolio of American cigar. So, 1902, Perfecto Havana, NEFTA was the brand. NEFTA sounds like something of an alliance that countries would sign. NAFTA, right? But this cigar dates back to 1902, produced from imported tobacco, from Cuban tobacco, imported to New Jersey in 1902. And the only thing I had to go on it was really pictures. Pictures that told me that this was made in factory number 2 in the 5th district within Trenton, New Jersey. Actually, the box didn't even say Trenton, New Jersey. It just said New Jersey. So I had to go from that, the brand name, and try to see what I could figure out and what I could dig up. And it wasn't easy, but I got something. So here we take a closer look at this vintage cigar that is well over 100 years old. And I just want to say, look, where did NEFTA really come from? Well, I have a few theories. And first I'm going to get to theory number 1, which is really my main theory, is that this was a cigar brand originally produced in Detroit that possibly had also shops and headquarters in Chicago, and was eventually bought out by the American Cigar Company. Now, how do I arrive at that? Well, June 17, 1901, the Consolidated Tobacco Company was incorporated in Trenton, New Jersey, with a capital of $30 million. Under the umbrella of this company were smaller enterprises, including the American Cigar Company, including the American Tobacco Company, the Continental Tobacco Company, the British American Tobacco Company, and the American Snuff Company. In this arrangement, the Consolidated Tobacco Company owned either a majority or a large portion of the stock of the subsidiary companies, thereby effectively controlling them without being in danger of having a monopoly. Well, isn't that great? In 1904, the company was marginally recognized and renamed the American Tobacco Company. Now, these series of companies were known as the Tobacco Trust. Now, as they branched out, they added more money to the trust, and the American Cigar Company was incorporated in 1901 in Trenton, New Jersey. And basically, it was owned by the American Tobacco Company. The purpose of the company was to cure leaf tobacco and buy, sell, and manufacture tobacco, cigarettes, cheroots, and cigars. The company was also a conglomeration of several smaller companies, including the Havana American Company, the American Stogie Company, the Federal Cigar Company, and the Seidenberg and Company. It was known as the largest manufacturer and distributor of cigars in the world. The value of the American Cigar Company as a subsidiary of the American Tobacco Company came from both the social and monetary importance of the cigar. Not only was the cigar the most aristocratic and most expensive form of tobacco, but also in the United States in the early 20th century, the value of cigars consumed was over 50% greater than that of all other manufacturers of tobacco combined. So from the time of its founding, the American Cigar Company understood that in order to gain a permanent foothold in cigar manufacturing, they must outproduce and outlast these smaller enterprises. One of the most effective methods in rendering them obsolete was to develop machinery that negated the advantages held by these smaller companies. Not only was initial cost of such machinery prohibitively expensive for small-scale enterprises, but it also required space and manpower that these businesses did not have. To this end, the Tobacco Trust, established in the American Machine and Foundry Company in 1901, and its entire purpose was to develop automated methods for tobacco manufacturing. Now, to address my theory, right, the land for the American Cigar Company building in Trenton, New Jersey was purchased in 1901 by the American Cigar Company. The advantages to locating a company in Trenton were that there was a constant supply of inexpensive labor, and the proximity of rail and water access provided easy access of both raw materials and the final product. By 1902, the factory was fully operational with 280 employees, producing both George Geo W. Childs and Cubanola cigars. From that time until 1915, the American Cigar Company, along with Enterprise Cigar Company, were the only cigar manufacturers listed in the Trenton City Industrial Directories, although there is no indication as to the number of employees. Now, in the Tobacco and Illustrated Weekly Journal for Wholesale Manufacturing, and in chapter of 1922, we read, in addition here from 1922, Royal Cigar Company Incorporated, Detroit, Michigan. The Royal Cigar Company of 606 Woodward Avenue has been incorporated with a capital stock of $10,000. Now, what's the connection between NEFTA and Royal Cigar? So I looked up something, it's called the OPA Price Service Food Desk Book, and this is an edition from 1944, and in it you have here 326, Royal Cigar Company, order number 326, amended, established maximum prices as set forth for sales and the applicants El Craco and NEFTA Cigars. Now this here is from the Federal Register, Volume 10, issues 1 through 11 from 1945, and as you can see here, this is Royal Cigar Company authorization of maximum prices, and this is something that would be made known to the public or to people within the industry in regards to their brand, size, and the pricing for their cigars. Now, in this one here, you see that NEFTA is listed as a Corona 50 pack, and this is the retail pricing. So here I dug up an old NEFTA label. It didn't say from what year the band was, this NEFTA band, but it indicates mild cigar. And for the most part, every time I saw something in reference to NEFTA, it would say mild smoke. So they were pretty well known for making mild smokes. Now, if you look here, you can see where it says factory number 2, 5th District, New Jersey, and then there's the number 50 underneath, which I don't know what that means. Could be the total number of factories in that particular district. I'm not sure. Now, I haven't had much success really finding cigar factories with this type of information. It gives you something to go on, but it doesn't really pin it down for you. I'm sure there's a way. There's definitely people out there that are much better at research than I am and can probably use something like this in order to locate the exact factory that made these cigars, and therefore at the same time acquiring more information about the makers of this cigar. But I'm almost certain that this was the American Cigar Company. But folks, for being over 100 years old, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it beautiful? And the band, I have to say, I like the band. I actually like it. I think this is a really nifty looking cigar, and I'm hoping that it provides the smoke I expect. Initially, when I lit the cigar, I got that familiar musty smell that I get in really old sticks. But it wasn't anything unpleasant. It was just, I'm familiar with it, right? Now, this is 1902. So, a typical day in the life of, let's just say, a middle income individual, man in this case. In 1902, he wakes up. There's no electricity, so it's dark, and you pretty much count on the daylight, the sun, to provide light into your home. There is no refrigeration, so you're not going to reach into the fridge for something cool. You may get some water from the well. You may wait for the milk delivery that comes in the morning, as well as your ice delivery. And once you've acquired the ice for your ice chest, then at that point you can put some things in there to stay cool, and it'll keep it cool for maybe a few days, right, before you've got to get more ice. So milk was something that obviously we all know spoils quickly. It wouldn't be something that you'd even keep in the ice chest. So you'd get your morning milk. Breakfast was not anything like breakfast of today. There were no quick breakfast treats. As a matter of fact, sometimes for the lower income individuals, there was no breakfast. It was get up, maybe some bread and water, and go off to work. And if you were a lower income worker, your work days were going to be 12 to 16 hours. If you were lucky enough to, say, be an office worker, something within administration, then you were probably working 8 to 10 hours. A little less work, obviously not as backbreaking, but nonetheless still taxing. A lot of time away from your family. Very smooth, very mild. And so this was the typical day in a man's life. There's a possibility that if he was of a middle or a higher income, the wife would be preparing some eggs in the morning, perhaps with some salted fish of some sort, perhaps some fruit as well. There would be bread, but again, it was a loaf of bread, and you'd cut a piece of it, and you had to be economical with this. It's 1902, and there is still a lot of uncertainty. And I'm talking now really in general for the American time period, because I really wouldn't know what it was like in England, although there were similarities in the lifestyles and in the way that they led their lives in 1902. So you've gotten your ice block, your ice chest is set. Now you're going to work. You're going to get on your buggy horse, or your horse, and you're going to ride to work. If you were lucky enough that you lived within a town where you could walk, then that was great. But a lot of people had to ride out to their job sites, and of course park your horse. And so you'd work your 8 to 10 hours. You'd come home. You want a cigar. The local tobacconist would have cigars. You'd go in. You'd buy a box. There was no buying singles. One of this, one of that. No, you bought a box of the brand you liked, the brand you trusted. And if it was NEFTA, you'd buy a box of the NEFTA, depending on your taste, and you'd take it home. Humidors were not a thing like today. You might, if you were maybe middle to upper income, might have something of a wooden chest or a metal type of box where you could keep your cigars. If not, you'd keep them in the same box that you got them in, and you'd place them somewhere, and you'd smoke them every day, and you wouldn't be worrying about humidity levels. You wouldn't be worrying about temperature levels. It was just the way things were. And we're talking about 1902. Again, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. There are no cars yet, okay? And mind you, once you got home from work and you tied up your horse and you went and you picked out your cigar and you lit it up and you waited for dinner to be served, this was an important part of the day for a lot of men that smoked cigars in that time, because this was their one moment where they could really relax, enjoy themselves. If it wasn't a cigar, it was a pipe, of course. Now, the previous year in America, William McKinley, the president, was assassinated, and there were no X-rays machines. Although there were some primitive ones, they were not used to determine where the bullet went. In 1901, the year before as well, U.S. Steel had just been founded by John P. Morgan. And so 1902 saw the presidential term of Theodore Roosevelt. And he was actually the first president to ride in a car in public, because I believe McKinley had beat him to it, but it wasn't in public. And mind you, these cigars were electric at the time. They were not gas automobiles. The Ford company wouldn't be started till 1903. And you wouldn't have those Model Ts until the 1910s and so on. So everything was horseback at this time, and horse buggies. So you had this type of lifestyle during the time of this cigar. An important thing in 1902 for Cuban tobacco and Cuban history was that Cuba declares its independence from the United States in 1902. And in 1902, the United States pretty much lets Cuba take control of its own products. And there's also a treaty that is signed, the Treaty of Reciprocity. Oh my God, I'm ruining the word right now, but basically it was an agreement between Cuba and the United States where goods and products would be traded, and there would be a favorable way of dealing with that. It was a sort of a tax break for the Cuban products. And so you had a lot of companies that were forming tobacco enterprises, and the Consolidated American, they weren't alone in doing this. Henry Clay and Bach, they also established, they were a little later in the 1930s, but in the early 1900s, you had this conglomerate of companies that were doing business and were controlling almost 90% of the Cuban import in the United States. And so, I did read where the American Tobacco Company did purchase the Royal Company. And this was in regards to Royal Company being a cigar company. But here's the twist to it. There was a Royal Cigar Company possibly in Chicago, right? There was one in Detroit that we know had to do with the NEFTA cigar brand. And there was a Royal Cigar Company in New York, and there was one in Atlanta as well. So it's a little confusing. Which one got bought out? Did they all get bought out? I'm going to say that because the NEFTA comes up so much with the Detroit Company, which, mind you, Detroit has a rich history with tobacco and cigars. I mean, at one point in the early 1900s up until the late 1920s, Detroit had nearly 40 tobacco manufacturers, and they were quite prominent. As a matter of fact, Detroit was considered the Tampa of the North because of the way that they were known for producing excellent tobacco products, excellent cigars. And, Detroit, they shuttered up in 1966. The American Cigar Company shut its doors, I believe, in 1969. So they were intertwined. And the Consolidated American Cigar Company, they were buying up a lot of people. I'm thinking they bought up the Royal Cigar Company from Detroit. And this cigar brand line was introduced later under their umbrella in New Jersey. So you know what? If you were lucky enough and you were waiting for dinner while you were having your cigar, you could probably have some Jello. Jello was something new at the time. In 1902, sales of Jello rose to $250,000, making it a very popular thing. But Jello wasn't something that you would have alone, right? You would have it with something else. You would have it to accompany something. Usually it was part of dinner or leading up to dinner. But depending on your status, what you would have some of it, perhaps with some small foods. Now, look, 1902 saw the invention of the air conditioner by Willis Carrier. But that invention wouldn't really be a thing until much later in the late 50s. And even then it was extremely expensive, and people didn't really have air conditioners in their home in America till probably the 70s and the 80s, when the prices started to come down. So, 1902 saw the first movie theater created out in Los Angeles, in New York, in the USA. So, the birth of Hollywood, as we know it, was sort of starting to take shape, and sound was being introduced. You want to talk about the breakfast? William Kellogg didn't invent cornflakes until 1906, a couple of years later. Frank Epperson created popsicles, in 1905, a year right before William Kellogg debuted with his cornflakes. In 1900, 2 years before this cigar was made, Milton Hershey debuted his milk chocolate bar. And, Goodfella Dry Goods opened in 1902, now known as Target, out in Minnesota. What's the cigar tasting like? It's mild. It's sweet. It's a little floral. A little cedar. But very mild. But not offensive in any way. Some mustiness. Some earthiness. Very, very, very light zing of spice. In 1902, if you were lucky enough, and if you had the money, you could go out and buy some of Nabisco's, Barnum and Bailey's circus crackers, because that was another popular food of the day, soup and crackers. And getting crackers wasn't like getting crackers today. It was actually from a wooden barrel, and sometimes they had mold. But having said that, when you think about the history at the time of the creation of this cigar, we're looking at 1902, Coca-Cola is still using cocaine in their soda pop. And it wouldn't stop till 1903. The Vintage Cigar Store provided this cigar. And of course he pretty much told me, look, this cigar is old. It's really old. See what you get out of it. Tell me what you think. And you know what? Honestly, it's very interesting to smoke a cigar like this, because you get sometimes a hint of what it might have been like, and then that kind of gives you an idea of what tobacco was like. But the fact that this is still smokable and that it's still agreeable after all of these years says a lot. bit of cream, bit of cedar. Very mild, right? But still flavorful. Not mild and lacking flavor, which of course would not be what one would prefer. But again, going back to 1902, the biggest thing for me in 1902 was the Treaty of Reciprocity. That's it. Did I get it right? Yes, I think I did. And this provided, a favorable, preferential treatment regarding the tariffs with Cuba, and this really amped up the desire for a lot of people to go into business in 1900 and on, and really deal, but specifically with 1902, and really deal with tobacco and the American market, and for that matter, the global market. See, right now, I just got a taste of that little cardboardy taste, right? I mean, I'm down to like almost the nub. And now is when I got that. So that's not so bad that I got that now, when I really should be putting it down, and I probably will be. But for the duration of most of the smoke, it was pleasurable. It was really nice at times, and it was mild, super mild. But again, NEFTA cigars were known for being mild smokes. So there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this video of 100-plus-year-old cigar, 1902, NEFTA Havana Cigars. Thanks again, George, for this cigar. Till next time on Backyard Cigars.